right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We need a motion to adopt the agenda. However, we have a few changes.
I'd like to make a motion to move item 6, 2025 board legislation, up to item 4, and item 11, election of officers, up to item 5.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? All right. We also need a motion to approve the minutes from August 2nd, 2024.
Motion to approve. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Now we're on to public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda at a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases or other adjudicative proceedings. Do you want to say anything this morning before we get started? Okay. All right, well, welcome for the actuarial evaluation.
All right.
Gavin McDonald.
Okay, thank you. We're here to present the results of the July 1, 2024 valuation. Before we get started though, I'd like to say that, because this is the first time you're seeing this, but we rebranded ourselves over the summer to CABMAC from Cavanaugh McDonald Consulting, because it's kind of a mouthful. So, but in the industry, that's kind of how we're recognized anyways by CABMAC. So we just kind of went with it, changed our color scheme up. But yeah, so it's, you'll notice our presentations look a lot different as well in our report. So I'm gonna kick us off, and now I'm gonna turn it over to Brian. So we do have some new board members, so this will be kind of interesting. So the first two slides are basically educational and kind of summarize our role as an actuary, or most people don't even know what an actuary is, so it's kind of. So I think it's helpful. But so the first slide asks us, why does your plan need an actuary? So basically actuaries help. We develop funding strategies for pension plans. So I should say too, actuaries are in multiple industries. So there's the insurance industry, but this is the defined benefit pension plan industry basically. So what makes defined benefit plans unique is that the benefit is defined, but you don't really know what it is until somebody actually retires and gets it, because it's based on a formula based on years of service and pay at retirement basically. So as the actuary, that's kind of what we do. We estimate that liability, and then from that determine how strategically how to fund it essentially. What's interesting here about your particular situation is that your contributions are also set in statute. So the contribution's fixed, the benefit payments are defined and fixed, so to speak. So really what we're doing for you is just giving you kind of a checkup. How do you stand? Your amortization period, your funded ratio, essentially. So in order to do the checkup, we have to measure your assets and your liabilities. The liabilities are the future benefit payments. So not only for people who are retired today, but for people who are going to be retired 20 years from now as well. In certain situations, we determine actuarial contribution rates. So that's if your contribution is not set in statute, the actuary would have to come up with a contribution based on a funding policy. In addition to that, we also analyze the experience. How did you get from the beginning of the year, from last year to this year? How did we get here? Because we make a lot of assumptions. So, and then finally, we put this together, in the reports, and you'll see trends and some risk analysis. And we also do the accounting disclosures too for your financial statements. Go to the next slide. We call this the basic retirement funding formula. So these are pre-funded benefit systems. So for you guys, this formula is in balance over the lifetime of the plan. And essentially it means the money in has to equal the money out. But if you think of Social Security, which is a pay-as-you-go system, it has to be in balance every single year, or else it gets disrupted and something has to either have to increase benefits or reduce benefits or increase contributions to make it balance. Since you guys are pre-funding, you're accumulating assets along the way that balance this out over the entire lifetime of the plan, essentially. The other thing I like to point out here is that, roughly 60 to 70% on how the economy is doing actually comes from the investment income. So it's actually a way to reduce the cost of providing these benefits is by setting aside money in advance and having it being invested in earning income and interest and appreciation. So, and then we go to the next slide. So the B, that's the benefit side. The liability side, that's going to be based on the plan provisions themselves. So they define, all the eligibility points for the benefits. And then the experience. So people, as they decide to retire, and then how long they live after that essentially kind of determines, the benefits essentially. And then the contributions, in the short term are going to depend on the assumptions, because in the short term we have to make assumptions about the long term. But in the long term, the contributions are really just a balancing item based on the other three components of that formula, essentially. So with that, we're going to get into the results. So you can see our picture there. We're smoothing out the future for you. We paid somebody for that, if you believe that. So yeah, we're really good at making, doing numbers, but making stuff look pretty is not in our bailiwick. So I'm going to finish up here, but I'm just this is like kind of my drop the mic type moment here, because basically the results this year are very good. So let's just start right there. So on a market value, just for the folks who don't know, but Brian's going to get into this in more detail, but for funding purposes, we use what's called actuarial value of assets versus market value. And the actuarial value just smooths in gains or losses over a 4-year period. And what that does is it just reduces volatility in the results. If you were to earn the assumed rate of return, which is 7.3% every year going forward for the next 3 years, and then after that, there would be nothing to smooth, and your actuarial and your market values would be identical, and therefore your returns on that would be the same as well. So it's really just a timing thing on how you're recognizing gains and losses. So on a market value, the plan earned 8.9%, but on a smooth basis, the plan earned 9.1%, and that was because there was deferred asset gains that were being recognized. The unfunded liability, so that's kind of your mortgage for your liability for your prior service cost. That went down by $78 million, so from 1.9 billion to just over 1.8 billion. So very positive. You want to see that your unfunded liability is going down every year.
What is that acronym, UAAL?
Unfunded actuarial accrued liability.
Thank you.
So it's equal to the plan's accrued liability minus the plan's assets. As a direct result of your unfunded liability going down, your funded ratio increased from 72.5 up to 74.3%. So very positive. And then the amortization period. So this is for those of you who are new, because your contributions are fixed, the benefit payments are fixed. The only thing that can really move in your formula here is funding period, or how long does it take to pay off the unfunded liability. So last year the amortization period was 24 years. All things being equal, if all the assumptions were met, we would expect you to be down at 23 years this year. But since you had even better than expected results, now you're down to 21 years. So we took 2 extra years came off the amortization period based on this valuation. So that's kind of the only thing that can move because your contribution rate's fixed, but the amortization period moves. Yeah.
Is that pretty typical of public plans for the contribution rates to be fixed, or do most of them allow for some movement?
So it used to be a common thing to have fixed contribution rates, but now, since the Great Recession, plans have been moving more towards like actuarial determined, layered amortization.
Do you know
methodologies.
what percentage are in each camp at this point, roughly? And maybe just the ones you work with?
I would say, so I work on a lot of fixed rate plans, so I'm kind of unusual.
Okay.
Brian works on a lot of,
Most of mine are actuarially determined, so probably 80 to 90% of mine, if I'm guessing, maybe 60-40 are actuarially determined.
In the industry, you think?
Yeah.
60-40?
it's about, I would say less than 40. I just read an article on this. It's probably 30 or less at this point now, so.
So that's hard for states to figure out their budget when that could change at every valuation.
Well, so there's ways to do that to where you can mitigate that part of it by having, for instance, we would determine a contribution rate as of July 1, 24, but it wouldn't be payable until the 25-26 fiscal year. You can have a delay in the timing in order to help out with that. And every plan that we have that is, actual determined rates has that feature in it. Because you're right, because we're here now, they would need to know what the contribution is already, so, because they'd have to start putting it in July 1. So from that regard, there's things you can do to help with that, so.
I don't know that anyone's ever mentioned we might be headed that way. Has it ever come up in your tenure?
During the legislature, there are bills sometimes to do something similar to that. Last session for the public safety systems, they actually passed a layered amortization bill that would act similar to what Todd's talking about. However, they kind of mucked it up a little bit because they didn't put a floor on the contributions, and so I think the push this session is going to be just to repeal that and go back to fixed rate. That's not to say it can't work. It's just we haven't seen one set up appropriately in Montana yet.
So, and really the legislatures like the fixed rate because they don't have to argue over it. When it changes all the time and you have to allocate more, especially when it's going up, it just becomes a big, it can be hard for them to. And there are states who had the actual determined contributions and didn't fund them at all. If you think of like Kentucky and Illinois and New Jersey. So those states, had they just had fixed rate contributions, would be better off actually, so.
Well, then what do you target for an amortization period or a funded ratio if you're able to move?
So, so actuarial practice now, it used to be 30 years, long time ago, and now it's kind of 20 years is kind of like your golden rule. But it really depends on the plan because it depends on the cash flow characteristics of the plan. So at the end of the day, any funding policy you're setting up is designed to not spend your money too fast. But you do want to spend it, because you're accumulating it to pay benefits, but you don't want to spend it too quickly. And so depending on your benefit obligation, you can have a longer amortization period may be okay. But if you have a lot of benefits going out, you may need a shorter amortization period to kind of, reduce that negative cash flow on the plan. So it really depends on the characteristics of the plan. But if you were just to ask an actuary, they'd say 20 years, so.
Public and private, or is it a different number?
Well, so private sector, they have prescribed methodologies that are by the IRS, so they really can't think about it. But if you are interested in the Conference of Consulting Actuaries just issued or reissued an update to their, it's a white paper on funding of public pension plans. And it talks about the different, amortization periods, and, in there they say 20, they said they recommend 20, so, but.
So with us at 21 here, is our goal to get to 20 or is our?
Goals to get to zero.
Yeah, your
Goals to get to zero, but we want it to be
Goal
always,
to get to zero.
we want it to be, you want to be under 30. We have been
Yeah.
where we could never amortize before. We were been infinitive amount. We could never We've been there
Without some
before.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
So this is
2009.
good?
This is good.
This is
great.
actually good.
This is like the
Alright,
best
just-
since I've been on.
No, this is very good. This is very good. But also, just to keep in mind the difference between 21 and 25, I mean, it's so small. So it's not like, so it's very volatile too at the end, when you're out here. So any slight change, like, this, I would say that, going from 24 to 21, that was very good, but that's also a very small change, and that stresses the volatility on the period, especially when you're out over 20, But going from, say, 5 to 10 is not as, volatile. But once you get out to the end of the amortization, the lengthens like that, it just becomes very, any small change. And this year, the small change was good, so we went down, took a couple of years off, so. But you should also, that's an important note as well. But the goal is to get to zero, the goal is to get to 100% funded. That's your stated goal, is to get to 100% funded as a board. So, it's actually to get above 100% funded. So. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Brian to finish it up.
So Todd gave you all the answers. I guess I'll give you the guts in the middle of how we got to those answers. So look at the assets first. Kind of mentioned that we had about around a 9% return for both market value and actuarial value. We assume 7.3% each year, and so because we're above that, that creates an actuarial gain. So that helps reduce that unfunded liability that we were just talking about. That amortization period shortens when we are above that 7.3% return. Now the deferred experience, kind of mentioned, we have a smoothed value of assets, or the actuarial value of assets, to where each year we look at the difference between what we expected to earn on the market value and what we actually earned, and that difference is the gain or loss. So this year we were above that, and we're going to smooth that in over a 4-year period. We did the same thing last year where we smoothed it in over a 4-year period, and we'll do that each year, right? So it's not whatever the difference is, from all the years past divided by 4, it's every year kind of layers it on. So overall, we have a $65 million difference between the market value and the actuarial value. So that's a deferred loss that needs to be recognized. But it's not recognized evenly. So what we see here is on that far right, the deferred experience recognition. If we earn 7.3% exactly next year, this is the way it would play out. So we have $115 million loss that would flow through next year. And then the following year, after that loss drops off, because that's the last year of that 2022 year that we had the big down year, that drops off. Then the following years, we'd have the small gains, the $30 million and then the $19 million gain. So kind of playing good cop, bad cop here. Todd said we dropped down to 21. If we earn 7.3 next year, we have this $115 million loss coming through. That's going to put pressure on the amortization period, pushing that back up, whether it's a year or 2. And so we're kind of hoping that we get above the 7.3 to kind of take out some of that. But that's the smoothing method that we see come through. Okay. The next slide. This shows the progress towards that 100% funding, right? So our goal is to get our unfunded liability, that UAAL, paid off to get to 100% funded. So the blue is the prior year valuation, kind of where we were at last year, what was expected to happen, and the orange is now with the 7/1/2024 valuation. So you can see at the beginning, the 2024, we're already starting lower, right? The orange is lower, so that's good. Our unfunded liability was lower than what we expected it to be last year, based on last year's valuation. And then we see that we're expected to fully amortize if all assumptions are met in 2045 instead of 2047. And another thing is we dropped 3 years. We expect one to go down each year, right? If all assumptions are met, we're going to pay it off 1 year at a time. We dropped 2 more years, but one of those was very small. So if you look at the blue on the graph, there's actually some blue right there in between 2046 and 2047. It's like $100,000. So when we moved 2 extra years, it was really like 1.05 years or something like that. So it's very volatile. You can get kind of some of those movements as well. But again, the result here, looking like we're going to amortize quicker than last year. So Todd mentioned the liabilities or the future benefit payments, right? This is what we're funding for to pay these benefits in the future, and those benefit payments all come from members, whether they're actively working members or currently receiving benefits, those retired members. So next few slides, we'll look at some of the historical information. This is over the last 15 years, kind of how things have moved. So with the active and the retired population, the active membership increased a little under 1% from last year. So we now have just over 20,000 active employees within the TRS system. And the retirees came up or increased by 1.7%. So our assumption is that the active membership will stay stable throughout. We know there's going to be some ups and downs, but over the long term, roughly stable. And so we have a slight increase, which is good. You're bringing in more actives, that's more payroll to pay contributions to help that system. So next one.
Have we increased our membership based on changes that we've made? Or, I'm looking at the state and I'm going, we aren't hiring more teachers right now, we can barely even find teachers, so are we just getting more people that are already in the system into TRS? Is that where that's coming from? Or
No, I mean, it's less than 1% growth year over year, right? So it's nothing that TRS is doing, it's what employers are doing out there.
Okay.
You know, it's actual FTE that they're
Okay,
hiring.
increasing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which
But
is a big
it's really
difference.
small.
They are increasing, it's still hard to get them, but we
Yeah.
definitely, every year I work with the new teachers. This last year was 50 new teachers.
Yeah.
We have a lot.
Okay.
Because population growth. And we just had a huge boom.
But I think don't we assume no growth to the active membership?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's a closed valuation, so we're not projecting more people coming in,
More contributors.
Yeah,
Yes,
right,
because
exactly.
we look at the two.
Well, I know that, the reason why I ask is, I just saw a chart the other day where you have school-aged kids here, and there are fewer school-aged kids in Montana right now than there were 10 years ago. So we're increasing teachers, but we're having fewer students. I'm just curious about how
Yeah, no, this is the overall
TRS.
plan membership, so.
membership.
Yep.
Side note,
Yeah.
squirrel, sorry.
Go to the next slide.
Okay.
So the average salary and the average benefits for those members that are receiving benefits, again, over the last 15 years, just kind of showing these trends that Todd talked about, right? How we look at trends over time. So the average salary, a little over 61,000 for teachers, about 2.5% increase from last year. And then the average benefit, a little over 26,000. And we see these both increasing. And you would expect to see the average benefit increasing too, because that formula, our plan provisions are based off of pay, right? Pay, years of service. And so you kind of expect both of those to go up in tandem. So the average benefit increased by 1.7% over this last year, a little over 2% over this time period.
And, I'd like just one thing to point out here, and it might add to your conversation there, but this is average pay for full-time employees or full-time teachers. You have a decent amount of part-time teachers as well. And so some of your growth in membership could be coming from the,
They're coming from
more
subsidies, to be
part-time,
honest.
more part-time people.
Because they pay in too.
Yeah, okay.
So, and that's a trend that's been going up since, I've been working with you guys since 2009, and that's a trend that's just kind of steadily been growing, so.
So on the next slide, look at the total payroll for the system. Again, this is full-time payroll only, and then the benefits, just total benefits. So again, both increasing about the same slope up here. The current total full-time pay, a little over 800 million, so an increase of about 1.7% from last year. We expect total payroll to go up 3.25% each year. That's with the total population staying the same, but then, turnover. So some teachers leaving, new teachers coming in, and then also the payroll, or the individual salary increases. So we expect 3.25% each year. When we only go up 1.7, that puts a little bit of pressure on that amortization period. So if we're not having payroll grow quite as fast as we expect, we're not bringing in as much, or not as many contributions if we don't have as much payroll, right? Because you're putting a fixed contribution on that payroll amount. So just a slight downward pressure on that amortization period this past year.
So can you go back to that? So the actual experience has been it's been 1.7, and we're using 3.25 in the valuation?
So this last year, our total payroll increased 1.7.
Oh, okay.
But our long-term assumption is 3.25.
And going backward for a long time, the 3.2 makes more sense to use?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, so we will see some fluctuations. A couple years ago, I think we had a bigger increase. We had some bigger pay increases, so it was above that 3.25. This year was below, but yeah, when we're looking at assumptions, very long-term, so. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So looking at the assets, the bars going up are the market value of assets, and then the smooth value or that actuarial value is the orange line. And so what you can see here is the volatility. The market values will bounce up and down, especially if you're looking around like 2020, 2021, 2022. You see that big spike in 21 and back down. Whereas the actuarial value, that orange line, a much smoother approach. And so this is the reason we use that actuarial value, that smooth recognition over 4 years, is because if we didn't, what we'd see, like in 2021 when we had that really good year, that 27% return, that our amortization period would have dropped way down. Everybody would have been happy, but then next year when we had the -4%, it jumped way back. Like, oh, what happened? And so we just kind of smooth those in because we're funding over the long period. One other thing to note here is when we talk about the return, so again, we were at 9%, right around 9%. That's compared to an assumption of 7.3. So we really were, a little over 1% above what our assumption was. So when we go back and we had that -4% in 2022, we didn't miss by 4%, we missed by 11.5 to 12%, right? So it's almost worse on the negative side. So even if you only earn, 2%, oh, our assets grew by 2%, well, we missed by 5.3% type of thing. So that's just one of the assumptions that's in here, but this kind of shows why we use this.
But that 9% on actuarial that we had this year, that was driven by the 2021 27% return. So that's been completely recognized on this valuation date. So next year, we had mentioned that there's a deferred asset loss that we're recognizing, and that's being driven by that -4.1% that, from 22. So, and then you can see the 23 and 24 both exceeded the assumed rate, and so that's why there's gains after those 2 years. So.
Okay, next slide. So this shows kind of what we saw during 2023, or from 7/1/23 through 6/30/24, kind of the experience. So we talked about that unfunded liability came down from what it was last year, right? So we had good actuarial experience. So this breaks it down into the different pieces. So that zero line, just right of center there, anything to the left of that are actuarial gains. So those are good. The negative numbers are good for the system. The positive number moving to the right are things that increase the unfunded liability. So some of the big ones here, withdrawals. So we had a loss on withdrawals. This just means that we had fewer teachers that left than what was expected based on the assumption. We had a loss on retirements. So some teachers retired earlier than what we expected. So if you retire earlier, you get more years of payments. And so it's before our assumption that comes out to a loss. The big one here is what we kind of talked about, that investment income, right? So that orange bar going across to the left, almost 90 million in actuarial gains, kind of wiped out all those liability actuarial losses. So overall, we had a $55 million actuarial gain, and that's, goes to reduce that unfunded liability.
Yeah, so just to point out here, I mean, these losses look like they're big because of the chart. Your total accrued liability is $7 billion. So as a percentage, they're very small. It's less than 1% of the total liability, so.
And we don't expect these to all be at zero, right? So we're setting these assumptions for the long term. One thing we can tell you is that all of our assumptions are gonna be wrong on a year-to-year basis. Over the long term, we're looking at trying to be as close to zero as you can. So some years are gonna be losses, some years are gonna be gains, but over the long term, we're hoping that they kind of cancel out in total.
So I know it's very small, but the mortality, that means our retirees lived a little bit longer than we expected.
Correct.
Okay, and what do we use for that, where you guys get data on life expectancy?
So we're using the Pub 2010 mortality table. It's a specific table that's designed it's based on public plan data that was produced by the Society of Actuaries. And we also have a projection scale that projects it out generationally, which means that, or generational improvement. And what that means is a 65-year-old today, or a 65-year-old 10 years from now is gonna have a higher, is gonna live longer than a 65-year-old today. So, so there's constant.
Even as the average lifespan has plateaued and even gone down, if you make it to 65, your life expectancy is gonna be higher than it
Well,
was.
so that always works, yeah, so once you survive to its next age,
Right.
your chance of living longer improves greatly, so, and also too, when it comes to mortality, you kind of read, all this horrible news about, the death rates and people dying. People in pension plans typically live longer because they have, they have a pension, first of all. They can sustain, but also too, with teachers in general tend to be better educated, make better choices. But when you're seeing the high mortality rates, it's really, it's a tragedy, but it's the opioid crisis, and young people are dying, at greater rates than ever before. So people in pension plans or pension plan populations tend to, in general, have better mortality.
Do you know,
experience.
what is that number? Is it 85?
It's, for males, it's like 85, 84, and for females, it's 87.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if you go, and it's becoming more common now, like especially the very huge retirement systems, like the California plans, they have many retirees now that are living over 100. And I mean, when I first started doing this, maybe one plan would have, and then that would be an error in the data, So, yeah, you'd have one participant. It was like, is this for real, So yeah, it's becoming a thing, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, so that's why that's why we project it out, and we constantly, Society of Actuaries is constantly, they're constantly reviewing the tables and updating them, and so, yeah, but we're using the most up-to-date table right now, so.
Not to pile on, but actuaries love to talk about mortality. The other thing is, every 4 or 5 years, we do analyze your data, what's happened over that period, look at the mortality for this specific group,
Yeah.
and then use those tables and make minor adjustments if we need to.
Okay.
And there are specific teacher tables. So Todd kind of mentions teachers seem to live forever. So they're different than public safety, different than
Yeah.
just general state employees. And so we're using that specific teachers table
Okay.
as well.
And it could be that Montana teachers live longer than teachers elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So just to kind of wrap up these results for the July 1, 2024 evaluation. The current valuation results there in the middle, and then on the right is the prior year, just for comparison. So going down here, the total normal cost rate. The normal cost rate is essentially the ongoing cost of the system. So the active membership, they're accruing benefits, and this would be the cost on a level percentage of pay over their career to be able to fund their benefits in total. So that 10.76% of pay is what their cost of their benefits are to fund them over their lifetime.
So if our amortization period was 0, or we were fully funded, this is all we would need?
Correct. Yeah, that would still be there because you still have active memberships that are earning benefits. The members pay 8.15% of pay, and so the difference between those two is what we call the employer normal cost piece. Now, Todd mentioned that we contribute, or the employer contributes a fixed contribution rate, so that's at 11.96%. If you take out the employer normal cost rate, whatever's left over is that rate that is used to amortize that unfunded liability. Okay, so compared to last year, our normal cost rate did not change much, right, like 0.01%. Our total contribution did not change, and so really, the amount of payoff that or amortize that unfunded liability is essentially the same, 0.01% less. So very, very consistent with the prior year.
And that's what we would expect unless we were changing something really. So like an assumption or there was a benefit change or something like that. So we expect to have pretty consistent normal rates from year to year, so.
So just real quick, one of the things that also contributes to that normal cost is the interest we credit to member accounts, right? And
Right.
so if you think about, like, we used to only be crediting a 0.2% when interest, interest rates were so low. And last year, for this valuation, I think the number was 4.5%, right? And then we did reduce that in May to 4.25%, but that does make a difference as well. Like, we can look at the monthly interest, and back when it was 0.2%, what was it? It was like 180,000 or something we were posting to each month, and now it's almost 3 million each month. So that is part of normal
Yeah,
cost.
so and that's, when you think of defined benefit plans, you're trying to reward longevity, and by crediting a high rate to the employee contribution balances, you're basically rewarding people who leave and take their money out instead of having that money stay in the plan and, and fund the actual benefit, the retirement benefit itself, so. And that's the incentive too. I mean, the incentive for DB plans is to work an entire career,
So we're required to have that somewhere near market rates by statute?
Well, it's, the statutory requirement is that annually the board will set the rate. I think the practice has always been to set it pretty close to the STIP rate. And I remember you asked the question, what does this do to our liabilities? And the only answer I could give you was, this is what we've always done. But after looking at what we pay every month, we maybe should not be quite that high, even when the rate is that, even when it is 5%, maybe we should be closer to 2.5%.
And that is,
just put a cap.
yeah, it's a great point, because that does move that normal cost rate too. So if we're paying more, or that STIP rate goes up, some of those members are leaving and taking their contributions and they're getting that interest on it, that will increase that normal cost rate. So it was pretty stable this time. The STIP rate went up, our normal cost rate went up, but we have the newer tier with the lower cost plan design that brings it down. So they kind of, this year, really cancel each other out.
But it went up this year, but not that much. It went up from 4%, so it was not a big, the year before was pretty significant. It was. Yeah, so, but this year it was a slight increase, so that's why it doesn't have that, it doesn't stick out in there, but, so it's just a smaller increase this year, but the prior year was pretty, a pretty big jump.
Okay, and then at the bottom of this page, the pieces that go into that unfunded liability, the actuarial accrued liability, the liability portion, a little over 7 billion. The actuarial value of assets, we're now over, a little over 5 billion, at 5.2. So the difference between those two numbers is how we get to that unfunded actuarial accrued liability, the 1.8 billion. Again, down from last year, we're a little closer to 1.9. So assets went up, liabilities went up, the assets went up faster, so we divide those two, gets our funded ratio. Our funded ratio, again, Todd mentioned, we went up from 72.5% to just over 74% funded. And then, as we've mentioned, that amortization period from 24 down to 21 this year. And that's the last few slides, just say that Todd and I are qualified to talk to you about actual results, but
And then again, and refer to the actual valuation for.
yeah, there's a lot more detail in there than in this short presentation, so.
Can we circle back to the amount that we pay folks that leave, or the amount that we accrue to the accounts? Do you see caps on other plans? Do you see lower than market rates generally there? Do you see?
I have plans that don't credit any interest, so.
Really?
Yeah, so, and some have it just set, just some number, 3%, whatever, 2%. you guys are.
Which would have been really, really high a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but a lot of the plans I work on don't credit interest at all. So you're kind of unusual, at least the ones that I work on. So.
Yeah, most of mine are lower with maybe a 1.5% or a 2% cap. Although I do have one municipality that guarantees 8% every year, so that's a little bit high, but.
TRS actually was at 8% a long time ago as well. It was the same, whatever the actuarial assumed rate was, that's what they were crediting to member accounts. I mean, it's been a long time ago, but.
Wow. You know, I would say a lot of that too was just driven by the time, so that was probably in the 90s.
Yeah, everything.
And you could buy bonds that were paying, you know, the 10-year treasury was what, 10%?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's a lot different now because you're have more equity exposure, so it's just a totally different investment, you know, strategy, so.
Wasn't our assumption 5% though, up until the last experience study?
The assumption was 5%, but then because you were crediting near zero, that we
We were gaining.
yeah, so we just switched it to, you know, what your actual crediting rate is, because, you know, as actuaries, you know, if you don't have to make an assumption, it's good not to, essentially, so that's why we did that, you know, because then, you know, we have to have justification for it, and there's really no asset class that we could tie to that, to the STIP account, so it's kind of, you know, you'd have to base it on, you know, something. And so that's why we decided not to, you know, just to use your crediting rate.
Yeah,
So.
okay.
Dee, I know you had a question? Yes.
Thank you. I have this actually for Sean. Sean, looking at this, knowing that our amortization period went from 24 down to 21 years, is this a time that we should start looking at a 1/10 or 0.2% on the assumption?
You mean I guess which assumption, the investment and return assumption?
Yeah, the return assumption, yes.
Well, we're only, when's our next experience study? In 2 years? I mean, we're halfway through the last experience study, so I mean, in 2 years, I think is when I would expect to look at doing something with the return assumption again, if at that time it's called for.
When was the last time we changed it?
2 years ago.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
It's time for public comment if there's anything that needs to be, or any other. Well, thank you both for your time in Montana.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming.
As always, we appreciate it. Thank you for your long, you know, long tenure as a client, so.
Safe flight and good luck in your game tomorrow.
Yeah, I got no hopes there. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
2025.
Yeah.
I'm Milwaukee. I
We're going to jump down now to board legislation.
Real quick, Madam Chair, I
Okay.
think we need to do, usually the board adopts the
Oh, yep, yep, yep.
evaluation results.
Thank you, I skipped that part. We need a motion to adopt the actuarial valuation results.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Motion passes. All right. Like I said just a moment ago, we're going to move the board legislation, item number 6, up to number 4 right now. Sean.
Yes, okay, so Madam Chair, members of the board, I just want to verify real quickly, so Dee and Dan, can you see the board packet on your screen?
No, I have no internet. I cannot see it. I should have printed it out, I suppose, but I don't have it.
I can see it, yes.
Okay, yep, sorry, I forgot you were on the phone, Dan. Okay, so there really weren't any changes to the legislative concepts we talked about in August, other than, you know, I did present those to the State Administration Veterans Affairs Committee. The actual bill draft, which is in your packet, have been submitted to the governor's office for their review. And I'll scroll down here to the actual revisions. In the packet, the revisions, the housekeeping bill revisions were all highlighted in yellow. So hopefully you had a chance to review those. As well, up above where I just scrolled through, I summarized each part of the housekeeping bill so that, you can have kind of a high level just explanation of what we're trying to accomplish in each of the sections of law. So those were all summarized. I guess I would leave it up to the board if you want me to sort of walk through each of these, or have you already reviewed them enough to where you're ready to talk about it, or, it's up to you.
Well, what's the definition of a cooperative, educational cooperative?
An educational cooperative?
It was under capacity, right? Your first one. You scroll down a little bit. It says
The educational services capacity?
yeah, it says an education, it's E, point E. What's the cooperative mean? What's that in there for?
Oh, because they're a TRS employer, so TRS employers will include educational cooperatives.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. I just had never heard it put that way, so.
A lot of the smaller districts will.
Co-op?
will
Yeah.
list it,
Okay,
the
yeah.
co-ops, yeah.
I didn't want to just assume that for the
Yeah.
list.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought we
No,
might
that's
ask
fine.
me about
No.
13, the highlight. So I guess, let me do this. I think probably the easiest thing to do is let's just walk through the few sentence summary that I wrote for each. So in our housekeeping bill, we are gonna add specific language to the extra duty service definition to include student supervision for things that by themselves weren't reportable to TRS. So examples of this would be like lunch duty, like playground duty, things that were not by themselves educational services. That if let's say a part-time teacher or a paraprofessional or even a teacher was assigned lunch duty and they got paid an hourly rate for that lunch duty, it's not part of their contract. In the past, we said that's not reportable to TRS. What we're doing is adding student supervision to that definition for extra duty service so they can get full credit for it. It would be reportable to TRS. It would count towards their retirement system. I actually went to the superintendent's meeting in Missoula this week, and there was 32 of them there. And I walked through these changes with them, and they all were like, well, yeah, that just makes sense. It should be reportable to
Is it
TRS.
significant?
It's not substantial, but for an individual, it can make a difference, especially if they're a lower wage earner. That extra, hour or two a day of additional wages can make a difference for their retirement.
But you would expect, I guess, thinking back to the valuation, that this would increase wages a little bit?
Yes.
And number of hours, but not number of employees, or is there a formula that says the hours equals the number of employees?
No, there's not a formula. So you're right, it would increase, you'd have the same number of individuals, but their salary, if they're doing this extra duty, it would reflect a higher salary for TRS.
Okay.
So that's the first change. The second change deals with non-contributing substitute teachers and part-time teacher aides. In current law, they're the only ones that have the option to opt out of TRS for the first 210 hours that they work. It's just part of our plan provisions, which is fine. We're not changing anything there, but what we are going to do is have employers start to report them to us as non-contributing members so we can track those hours in our system so that we don't end up in a position where an individual's working for two different schools. They don't know that he's working, he or she's working for the other school, and they actually exceed the 210 hours, and we come back 10 years later and say, well, that was salary and service not reported, and we charge them for that. So our system will automatically track it. It's already built in into M-Trust, and we'll get rolled out here later this spring.
Yeah,
around the first of the year.
Yeah, we'll have it in place by January 31st is the anticipated rollout for their January report, which is due by February 15th, so.
We're doing it either way, but do we have to have this legislation to do that, or is this just to make sure everyone knows what we're up to?
So we're doing it, you're right, we are, and I think we have the latitude to do it under our law. This just makes sure that there's no question down the road that it is an actual requirement. You have to report just for these specific employees that are really non-contributing members, you have to report them to us. And it was at the employer's request, they asked for this, so, yeah.
Hi, Sean, I have a question there. If in fact they opt out of the TRS membership, can they come back 5 years from now and say, oh, wait a minute, I opted in now? And they can recoup that?
So, so if they opt out, the employer has them fill out a form to do that. They opt out of that first 210. And then 5 years later, if they decide they want it, then that's a service purchase that is made by the member. We sell them that first 210 hours of service credit.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And service purchases are not cheap.
No. We use the actuarial assumed rate for interest, yeah, so they are not cheap. Okay, the third piece of this is clarification of deferred membership for those same substitute and part-time teachers. And what it is our current statute says we can only sell 210 hours, and the way we're building this into our system is the first of the month following when you exceed that 210 hours, you're going to be moved to active, which means you could have had 220 or 230 hours that would be available to purchase down the road if you so decide, if that's what you decide to do. So we just are clarifying in statute that it could be a little bit more than 210 hours, but it is still one of those service purchases that a member would be eligible to make if they wanted to do so. The fourth thing is, our membership statute, it explicitly names certain positions, teachers, principals, superintendents, so on and so forth. And then it has a catch-all phrase that basically says anyone else working for a TRS employer in an educational services capacity, which was never defined in statute. So we are defining it in statute, and we're using the exact same definition that we have in our fact sheet that we've been using for which positions are reportable to TRS for the past 10 years. So this just is, sort of memorializing it in statute. This is what we consider educational service capacity. So there's no question, because that was really it was a really important term that sort of is an overarching term, but if you don't understand what that means, you really, as an employer, you don't really know what's reportable unless you go look at our fact sheet. Okay, that next part is the same. That's the same explanation, as far as the amount of service to be purchased for those substitute part-time aides. It could be slightly over the 210 hours. 1927-03 is the required minimum distributions. The IRS passed Secure 2.0 a couple years ago. We're just putting those exact dates in statute of when your required minimum distribution, the date is depending on when you turn either 70 and a half, 72, 73, or 75.
Sean, your screen's black.
My screen's black?
Go behind on what you're.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's because I'm reading. Sorry, so I have not been moving this for anyone. Okay, so that was this one, 703. That's just, we have to do that. That's just the IRS code. We have to put the R&D and dates in. And then the last one was a clarification of how we calculate a disability benefit when a member retires on a disability and then comes back to work and is back to an active member status and then re-retires from TRS. If you remember last time we talked about our current statute is kind of incomprehensible, so we made it to where we actually know how to do it now. And anybody can read it and know how it will be done.
Yes.
So those are all the changes. I mean, as I said, and you've seen it in your packet, the actual bill, the actual language is in your packet. If you have any questions about that or want to point me to a specific page, I'm happy to do so.
No, thanks for highlighting it all too. That's just helpful, because then I can.
Yep, and I would add, we did incorporate all the changes that Dr. Watson, brought to us at our last meeting in August. He had a few suggestions, and we did incorporate all those into our housekeeping bill. where he asked for them, so. Okay, if there's no other questions on the housekeeping bill, the only other bill that we're bringing forward this session is our university system supplemental contribution bill. We did get those numbers. I sent you all a copy of the MUS evaluation. You could see that the current rate of 4.72% would need to increase to 14.21% in order to pay off that unfunded liability by July 1, 2033. And Member Brown had asked last meeting, if we've given thought to or tried to do something more incremental in the past. And those of you that have been on the board for a while, like Dan and Carrie, you probably remember we did run some numbers on that before and looked at, instead of going the full 14%, what would we have to do if we went a smaller percentage? And so for this year's valuation, I asked Todd to run some numbers for me, just so that we could put this kind of in perspective. In order, like if we were to say, what would the rate be to like sort of reset the 30-year period? So instead of having to pay it off by July 1, 2033, let's take it out 30 years. What would that 4.72% have to be to pay it off in 30 years? And it actually would have to go up from 4.72 to 6.07%, which is a 1.35% increase. And that's about, for current year, that'd be about 4.3 million more per year from the university system. If we were to go 25 years, that number would go from 4.72 to 6.73%, and that would be an additional 6 million per year. One thing to sort of just to keep in mind is they've already been paying a contribution rate to TRS for 35 years now that they've been paying a percentage of compensation to TRS. So if we were to say, let's take it another 30 years, that'd be the 65-year payment. I don't know, to me, it seems like that could end up blowing up in our face. So I guess my proposal, or my advice would be just to bring the bill like we have in the past, where we tell them this is the full amount it would take to pay it off by July 1, 2033, and we have that conversation with the legislative committee and remind them that when you close off a plan, the liabilities don't go away. In this case, they're sort of fortunate that everybody else is picking up the tab.
And it's people who didn't choose to leave teachers' retirement that are still paying the bill for this.
Correct.
The university professors that didn't choose that. So
What's gonna happen in the 2033 or the 2035 session, do you suspect?
So the way that the law is written, there's nothing that automatically turns it off,
Yeah.
right? It just says, this is the contribution
Well, and
rate.
in our plan, does it run forever in our plan?
We're
or does it
assuming-
stop?
No, we're assuming
it continues on. Okay.
So I would suspect in 2033, someone or several legislators will likely bring a bill on behalf of the university system to shut it off. And of course, I will go up there and oppose that as strongly as I can. And I will look for some partners with some of our other groups to also oppose it, because if School Boards Association, school administrators, even the union likely, they shouldn't support that, because the university system hasn't paid off their unfunded liability. Now, if all of our other assumptions are met and we're fully funded in 21 years, at that point, we can probably let it go. I mean, but truthfully, when you do the calculations, even at that point, it's gonna show that they didn't pay it off, everybody else did.
Plus, if we get fully funded and then you turn that off, we're not fully funded the next day.
Correct,
Yeah, exactly.
That you have to take that into account as
Yeah.
well, yes.
So we have to be more than fully funded.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
And then I guess just for a point of reference, so our total contributions in fiscal year 24 that just closed was 14.6 million is how much we received from the university system. That's what that 4.72% of MUSRP employees it comes out to, is 14.6 million.
John, Dan, can everybody hear me? I have a couple of comments and questions.
Yes, we can, Dan.
Okay, well, first, let me say hello to all of you. This participating over the telephone is for the birds. I really wish I was there with you in person. I apologize. I have no. Anyway, Sean, it occurs to me that if we were to make sure that when we bring these legislative bills to the forefront, we offer some sort of contrast that gets out to all the rest of the teachers, showing the total health of the system if the University of Montana does not participate more fully in the future versus one of these options that you just so eloquently expressed. You know, if we moved it up to the 6.07% for 30 years and they're adding 4.3 million more, that contrast with where they are now by itself may be enough to really incite the ire of the rest of the teachers who are providing the funding. So while I've got the stage here, just allow me to say, listening to all of you from afar made me realize, maybe for the first time in a sort of a 30,000 foot way, that the whole purpose of what you're doing there on the board is to take a look at so many types of assumptions: mortality charts and trends, population growth, wage growth, the return percentage that Dee brought up, the relationship between the actual volatility of what the Board of Investments is doing and the assumptions that you're making on smoothing out that pattern over the years. It's very much like an airplane ride from Singapore to New York City. There's 1,000 little assumptive responses and adjustments that have to be made every year. And I think you just all do a fabulous job of understanding that. So that makes me comfortable about the future of this. So I just wanted to make that comment, and I'm wondering, Sean, what you think about the way you're going to present this to the legislature.
So the university system bill I've presented this bill every session since starting with the 15th session.
Right.
And it has a good hearing every time, but to be frank about it, it's not included in the governor's budget. It's not likely to be included in the governor's budget this session, which means if it were to pass, the university system would have to figure out a way to come up with that extra however much per year out of their existing sort of funding. So the likelihood of it passing is not very high, but I think the real story and I try to convey this to that committee when I do go up there, is that this isn't a made up thing. This is what happens when you close off a plan to new membership and you have a liability. That liability doesn't go away. And even through all of your best efforts of adjusting contribution rates and so on and so forth, it can even grow more than expected, and it could be reduced more than expected depending on experience. So they have the same, they get credit for when we have a 27% return, but they also they have to take the hit when we have a negative 4% return. That's really the story, and I have the history of this. It was created in '87. In '88, the contribution rate was set at 4.503%, right? In '93, they dropped it down to 2.5% because there was sort of this dueling actuary situation going on where we had our actuary, the university system didn't believe us, they had their actuary. At one point, the legislative audit division had an actuary that they hired. So there were 3 different actuarial reports. So there for a few years, the contribution rate was going up and down, up and down. But if you think about this, in '88, they set it at 4.5. Right now, it's at 4.7. In '93, they dropped it to 2.5. In '98, they kicked it back up to 2.8. In '99, they went to 3.1. In 2000, they went to 3.42. In '01, it went to 3.73. And then in '02, it went to 4.04. And then the last time it's been adjusted was in '07, and they took it to 4.72. So the other side of this, they would have stuck with 4.5 from '88 to 2000, we probably would be about where we need to be.
Yeah, crazy. Right.
But your recommendation, Sean, is to not push for a higher rate incrementally, just to stay under the radar a little bit, so that,
Yeah, I mean, if I'm asked, or if the opportunity presents itself for me, and I probably will just work it into my testimony. I have these numbers and the timeframes and the dollar amounts.
Yeah.
I'll work it into the testimony, so, alternatively, if you don't wanna come up with the 14%,
there's some options.
we can kick this payoff date out 30 years. And the new rate would be this, and this is how much it costs. I mean, I can certainly, and I will do that.
Well, you could stress that the last time this was raised was 20 years ago. It should have been raised a few times between then and now, and the issue wouldn't be as big.
Correct.
But we're behind the 8 ball, let's make an adjustment up,
Yeah.
maybe.
And honestly, we've just been, in all of these years, we know that they just do not do anything about it. So
Yeah.
we've gotten complacent with it. It's just that we're not gonna get anything. We could fight as much as we want, they're not gonna do it. And you don't blame them. I don't blame the university employees that wanna pay 6% on what? They don't get anything from it, nothing.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it is just the employer, but
But it's part of their salary.
The employers say that, if they weren't paying that to TRS, that's money that they could be putting into
Whatever.
those
Yeah.
employees' defined contribution plan.
Sure.
So,
It is.
yeah.
Well, and I think we need to, Madam Chair, I think we need to be reminded too that even though our executive director is not a teacher, he is the educator when he goes into those committee meetings and does a fine job of explaining this stuff. I mean, I'm glad that Sean is there for us explaining this, because legislators turn over, but I'm glad our executive director does not.
You're right. You're right. Okay, well, that, we also need a time for public comment. Does anyone in the room want to say anything? All right. So we need to approve this legislation for the 2025
Madam
session.
Chair, I approve the TRS legislation for the 2025 session.
Is there a second?
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Thanks for all your hard work. All those in favor of approval of the 2025 session legislation, indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye as well. Motion passes. All right. The next thing we're going to jump to, we're jumping all the way down to item 11,
Glasses on so I can see.
which is the election of officers. We wanted to do this before Dee had to exit. Dee, thank you for going to NCTR for us and for sitting on the committees and different things that you do as well. So we need to elect a chair and a vice chair. And we need to also get our committee appointments done with the Budget and Audit Committee, the Personnel and Policy, and the Legislation and Litigation. We are all currently on a committee. And so if anybody wants to change, or the discussion is open now.
Was it a whole year ago that we did the committees? I thought we just talked about that.
We did in February.
The election of officers is always in October, but
Yeah.
remember, we deferred doing the committee assignments because we were waiting for both Elliot and Brian's appointments.
Okay.
We were waiting for new board members.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, I'd like to be on the legislative committee again this time, session coming up, it's kind of fun.
Appreciate it.
I'd like to stay on legislation too, Madam Chair.
Yep, your connections would be great there. And I'm fine doing what I do with the Personnel and Policy.
Yeah, I'm just learning what I did, I had a short time, so staying there is probably a good idea.
Are you okay with the budget?
It's on
Or
personnel.
personnel, sorry.
Policy.
He's on budget.
You can change it if you want, I'm
No,
happy to do
no.
whichever.
And then Dan, are you still okay with the budget?
You can fit me in wherever you need me.
All right. Well, if everybody's good with their committee assignments, there we go. We just need an election of chair and vice chair.
I nominate Carrie for chair.
Second that motion.
Are you okay doing it?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, you've done a great job.
Well, thank you. We need a vice chair.
Dan, are you interested in being the vice chair again?
Are you? Yes, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Recommend Dan Chamberlain as the vice chair.
What we got?
All right. Well, we need a motion. We had one, I think. Did we have a motion to just accept?
Yeah, you can do
Accept
that,
the
yeah.
slate as it stands from last year.
Okay.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes aye as well. The motion passes. Do we need a separate one for the committees?
No, I think it's, I think the way
All right,
the motion was
thank you.
made is fine.
All right. All right. So now, Brian, yes. So now we are on to administrative business.
So, yeah, tab 4.
Yes. Backwards. And we'll start with the investment report. Dan.
Yeah, so actually have a meeting next week, so I don't really have anything super current for you, but I would say returns have been good. We just obviously talked to the actuaries about returns for last fiscal year. Been good again since then. Having a good day today, actually, so. Yeah, so
Good
things have
job
been good.
report.
Yeah, good jobs report today. Surprised to the upside on that.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Dan, this is Dan Chamberlain. I do have one question for you. When Todd was speaking about our rate of return in the last year at 8.9, augmented by 0.2% up to 9.1 with the deferred assets being liquidated, it made me wonder. I think probably most of those deferred assets are coming from the private side of the asset mix. First of all, is that accurate?
No, I think the way to describe that better is just that we had a good year in 21 and we had a good year in 23. We had a bad year in 22, but we still have enough from the good year to be smoothing up. And then next year, we're gonna lose one of those smoothing up years and we'll be smoothing down a little bit, I think, if things stay constant. I think it's the total return across all of CAP, and not necessarily just one asset class. And really what drove that mostly was US equity, I think. Privates did fine too those years, but there was some lag on the up and down on the private side. But I think US equity was really the driver of those good years, as it often is.
Actually, that wasn't my question. Okay, remember when he said that the return went to 9.1, up 0.2% from the 8.9 that was realized from asset appreciation in stocks, and that was the result of deferred assets that had been liquidated and realized gains.
I think he's just talking about the smoothing, and you didn't have the luxury of having the report and everything in front of you, but I'm pretty sure, is that right?
It's the 4-year.
It's just the 4-year smoothing.
All right. Well, then that leads me to the same question, though. Does the Board of Investments have a scheduled methodology by which those assets are liquidated and gains are realized, or is it completely dependent upon the assets? So, for example, in that private batch of assets, I think some of those are slated to sell at predetermined times and others are not. Is that true?
Yeah, I think both real estate and some of the private equity holdings, they have sort of a lifespan of their own. They have kind of a J curve, and some of them are evergreen. We're moving a little bit more toward sort of reinvesting and staying with a strategy for longer, but depending on the year you bought it and how things go. And then, as you know, in private equity, it just might not be a good year to sell the businesses you've been building, and so you wait. So sometimes they extend, sometimes they go a little bit shorter. So the cash flows are a little bit uncertain, but we do have a very detailed schedule of when we expect them. And then we're always deploying new capital into those markets every year too, to try to keep our tenure of those assets more stable. Does that make sense, Dan? We do have a schedule
Yeah,
for that.
it totally does.
Yeah. Yep, we
The
keep really,
reason for
really.
the question,
Go ahead.
the reason for my question overall is because I was trying to understand the methodology by which Todd and Brian are utilizing to create that smoothing analysis, whether they're getting actual feedback from the actual volatility of the assets at the Board of Investments, or it's a more generalized conceptual map by which they're making assumptions on that smoothing analysis.
I think it's very, very simple. If we're above 7.3, they take that difference and smooth it over 4 years. If we're below 7.3, they take that difference and smooth it over 4 years. So they just divide by 4. That's it. They're not talking to the Board of Investments at all. And I think that's just the way actuaries do this. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you look in your valuation, the full report on page 16, you can see the actual dollar amounts, how they work out by year with the 4-year smoothing. So that, if you look at 2024, the current year, that the third prior year back before 2024 is a $206 million actuarial gain, right? That's been spread out over 4 years. This is the last year we have that $206 million, and that was from the 27% return year. But the $146 million, which was the second prior year back, that's the negative 4%. So it is just as I think as Dan Trost just explained, it is a very simple, whatever those gains are over 1 year are spread out over the current year plus the next 3. And it's the same way if it's a loss, it's spread out over the current year plus the next 3.
And all they're looking at is the total return,
right,
year by year. So it's not divvied into what came from appreciation versus cash flow versus, dividends or interest or whatever. It's just the total return year by year.
Yeah.
I guess the potential flaw in that system, in that methodology, is that it's always looking in reverse. So there's really no actuarial discussion process that's ever been created that I can think of that looks forward. For example, there are some analysts now that are evaluating elections and their outcomes by certain different patterns that are based on issues. And it makes me wonder if there might be new methodologies that could be added into this actuarial process in the future to help determine assumptions about things like return rates, and not just based on past experience, because past experience will not be repeated indefinitely into the future.
Yeah, the Board of Investments tries to deal with that by spending an awful lot of time projecting future returns for different asset classes, and then trying to target what the pension plans need. So if the target percentage return is 7.3, they're going to try to build an allocation with the least amount of risk possible that's going to hit 7.3. So I think that, I don't know, it's hard to estimate what might happen in the future when the Board of Investments can change the allocation year by year. And they will, trying to hit that target. So I guess I don't know how they would do that on an actuarial basis, but I like the idea.
I think it's comforting to hear what you just said, that they do make an evaluation of how to get that target with the least risk possible. That's an important point.
Absolutely 100% the goal of the Board of Investments. And that's what we're going to work on, I think, next week, at least the first reading of what the asset allocation changes might be. It takes a couple of quarters to really dig into that, but I think this next meeting is the first reading of what they're thinking. And when changes are made, they're very incremental. We kind of, it's a big ship, so we make kind of slight turns, and things have been good. Look back historically, I was going to say on the 5, 10, 20 inception to date, we're above the actuarial hurdle. The only one we're not is the 3-year, and that's because there was a really crummy year in the last 3. But overall, it's worked. And I agree that you can't look at prior returns and say, well, I think we're gonna do that. I mean, if you look at equity valuations right now in the US, they seem pretty rich. But that's why we've got all sorts of other investments too, taking the right kind of risks. We're getting a liquidity premium on some of our private investments. We're looking at some international because dividends are higher and valuations are better. So trying our best to figure out, as I mentioned, the best way to hit that return with the least amount of risk possible.
Yep. Great. Thank
Yeah.
Yeah, is that enough? All right, any
It
questions?
is hard to speak on something you haven't, you're gonna do
You're right,
next
you're right,
week.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it, it's very, very minuscule change, the
Yeah.
allocation, yeah,
Which is
or what's
pretty typical.
proposed.
All right, Nolan, would you like to join us at the table for the financial statements and budget report?
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We're looking at page 21 in your packet. This is the balance sheet and financials as of August 31st of 2024. There's also where we were at August 31st, 2023 in there for, a 1-year look back comparison. These, they just look so similar in a lot of categories that, so, there's nothing really that jumps out at me, other than, of course, you can see our cap, the consolidated asset pension pool is up, about 200 million in comparison to where we were at August 31st of 2023. And then that drives everything below that. Our assets are up by about exactly that 200 million number. So everything is very similar. So it's all kind of driven by our there's not, unless anyone has any questions on the balance sheet, there's nothing really. We did completely amortize the M-Trust project in fiscal year 2024, so that's completely amortized now, and that's why you see that 0 in intangible assets. But other than that, there's not a huge change there. Unless there's questions, I'll move on. You'll kind of see that same theme throughout the fund balance statement. We're up about 10 million compared to where we were last year, and it's all driven by investments. Our benefit payments always go up just slightly each year. So those are up a little bit from last year, but not a significant amount. So our total expenses are up by about exactly that benefit payment amount. And so you see, we do have about a $10 million more than we were last year for, our revenue over expenses, and that's all driven by the investments again. On the next page, you see the source, of and it's basically, just our securities. We have about 10 million more in investment revenue than we did at this point last year. And yeah, with 3% so far, is that what it was, Dan? 3% so far in just the 2 months of this year. Obviously if that were to continue, we'd have like an 18% return, but let's cross our fingers for that.
We like those years.
Any questions on the financials? I can move on to the budget. Obviously early in the fiscal year, so really hard to project, what our budget surplus or deficit would be. We are fully staffed, so if that continues, we're gonna be very tight on our personal services because we, kind of budget for a fully staffed, to be fully staffed. Usually we end up with a few vacant positions throughout the year, so you might see that number go up throughout the year. And then our operating expenses, should be pretty tight this year. We don't have the audit fee number that, is budgeted for 2 years. This is the second year, so we always budget that we're gonna spend all that. We probably won't spend every amount, that's that, 94,000 right there, the audit fees, but we always just, cause they could technically charge all of that, so. So yeah, we're gonna, it's real early to project this, but hopefully we'll be around 100,000 surplus by the end of the year, but.
We're gonna hold you to it.
Yeah, okay. If we land right on that number, I wanna raise.
Okay, we'll give it all to you. Split it up.
So, then the next page, is our biggest category as of August 31st for the contracted services. We're only 17% of the, through the fiscal year, only 2 months in, and we spent about 9% of that. So that's, again, just too early to project. Some of these are really big fixed cost fees that, maybe we just haven't got that one quarterly bill yet or whatever, so. Any questions on anything? The delinquent agencies, we're doing really well. We have 2 really small, Bear Paw Cooperative and Carbon County that, I've been in contact with them, but they have not got some reports in yet, but they're, you're talking about a very small amount of contributions. And, I'm still in contact with Lame Deer about the June report to see if everything they reported in fiscal year 2024, was accurate, because they technically did not do a June report. That doesn't mean that they didn't just screw up and do it all in May. So yeah, it's kind of complicated, but they could have not missed very much, because it does look like the overall numbers aren't way off or anything, but they have a lot of turnover up there, and we are dealing with some new people, and hopefully we can get everything sorted and make sure that they got, I think Chris has it on her schedule to audit them at some point later this year, once that clerk is, a little more experienced, so that we can hopefully make sure that everything is correct for those members. And that's really all I have.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would like to know, I saw that the audit fees went up, 21,000?
Yeah, so, Member Brown and Madam Chair, members of the board, the audit fee is a biannual amount that's, so really, if you take what was expensed in fiscal year 2024 and then the budget for fiscal year 2025, that overall number, those two together, which I guess, my math, 170,000-ish, that number is what we're budgeted for the biannual amount of 2024-2025 biennium. And so
I was looking at the numbers go down to audit, just a minute,
the audit
right there.
fees,
Current,
Expense
That one.
versus.
Right, so we're in the second year of the biennium, right? So we actually spent 73,000 in '24, and if you remember how those legislative audit probes work,
yep,
they get the full amount for the 2-year period. So we spent less than half of it, right? So we have 94,000 remaining. They'll likely charge us most of that, but they may not charge us all of it. We do
Right.
sometimes have a little bit of surplus there. But that's just the remainder of that two-year appropriation that they got on their end, than what we're gonna get billed for.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Nolan.
thank you.
The next item on our agenda is our tentative meeting dates. If you look down just a little bit, the next meeting is December 6th. Does that work for everyone? That's usually the most important one.
Do we get to the action item?
We're first. And then, looking ahead, it would be then February 21st, May 9th, August 1st, but most importantly, would be the December 6th, the coming up one. It works for me, but
Yeah, I'm good.
Looks good.
Dan and Dee, does that seem to work for you both?
Yeah, it works for me, yeah.
That works for me as well. Did you say February 21st?
Yes, what is the next one out there?
Yep, good.
Okay. All right, well, we will then tentatively go to that. And it's now time for public comment if there's any other, or the budget or the investment report or. All right, so now we're going to move to an action item, which is our out-of-state travel for Nolan for the P2F2 conference.
Yes, so Madam Chair, in your packet is the request and justification form Nolan filled out, and I would just remind the board, this was included in the budget you approved in May. However, before we, take off and go out of state, we always have you actually approve the specific items. So this is the annual conference that Nolan attends, and just asking for your approval.
We have a motion?
To make a motion to approve the travel.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Have fun in Indianapolis.
Never been, so.
All right, and just one more clarification, next meeting date, December 2nd, or December 6th, 2024.
Yeah.
And then we'll move down to the executive director's report.
Or do you want to take a break?
Oh,
And then,
sure.
because we do
are-
have,
it's 10 o'clock,
definitely
yes.
have stuff after lunch that's gonna take us a little bit of time, so we could, since we moved two things up, we could
After lunch?
take it.
After
Or not
the break.
after lunch, after the break, sorry.
I thought that too. I was like, I read that wrong. Am I gonna be here after lunch? All right, we'll take a break. Let's come back at 10:20. And we are going to start with the executive director's report. Sean?
All right, Madam Chair, so behind tab 5, in your printed packet is the Executive Director's Report. I don't have a whole lot to update you on this, at this meeting, other than to let you know our benefit officers have been out doing the Ready, Set, Retire workshops. A few of these have already taken place. They went to Glendive and Billings, and then Cut Bank in Great Falls this week. They have a few more scheduled next week, and then, of course, the annual conference is held in Bozeman. And we're sending 2 benefit officers, as well as Darla, and is Jen going too? Darla and Jen are both going as well. So we'll have a booth at the conference. One of the benefit officers will be scheduling and doing one-on-one consultations with members that are there. And the other one will be doing the presentations. So that's all going well. And I did, I think I briefly mentioned this earlier today, but I did finally make it to the Southwest Mass meeting. I actually went this week on Wednesday and presented to them. It was kind of nice. I gave them actually a little bit of some flavor of what we're looking to do this upcoming session, in addition to what we already did last session as far as legislative changes. The meeting went great. There was actually really well attended. There was 32 in attendance, so a lot bigger, a lot more attendance, at least that one was, versus most of the other ones I went to last spring. So that is all complete now. We did hire a replacement for Tina West. Tina actually was promoted to a retired payroll technician position. And so Mary Corder, who was our successful candidate, and those of you that are here likely met Mary this morning when she got the goodies in. We're happy to have her on board. And then the next topic would be the Legislative Intern Committee. Is there any, unless there's any questions about the summary? No? Okay, so the SAVA met on September 5th, where they reviewed their draft SJ4 final report. And SJ4, as a reminder, is the Senate Joint Resolution that created a study committee this interim. Really, I think the only thing that may be coming out of that report is just sort of favorable language, that all of Montana's systems are funded under 30 years and are at least currently in good shape, is kind of what it sounds like the conclusion of the report's gonna be. Any questions about that? I am scheduled to go present to them on the results we just got from Todd and Brian today. I'll present those to SAVA on October 24th.
How many people are on that committee?
The SAVA committee is pretty good size. It's, there's probably 10 to 12. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but at least 10, and then maybe as many as 12. It's a pretty good sized committee. So that concludes the executive director's report.
We have another opportunity for public comment, if there is any. You're the only one here, so. Just wave at me if you need something. We'll jump ahead then to our TRS internal auditor report. Thank you, Chris.
Madam Chair, members of the board, just finished our second year of auditing schools, state entities. I think I had one university system in there. So my process didn't change really much at all from last year. I have worked a lot closer with the active team to get them the information that they need, make it more available. And I actually, if there's more information that they need, I've been asking for, more reports that they might need to go back farther, to get the information. My process, what I ask for, what I review. Currently, I do look at every single employee, TRS and non-TRS employees, just to make sure what's being reported is being reported correctly. And this year I did have quite a few bigger employees that I looked at. So the numbers are a lot bigger than they were last year for the estimated contributions and the errors that I found. As far as service and salary not reported, these were a lot of these came from some of the bigger entities. The state, there was one big state entity that didn't report quite a bit. There was about 231 service salary not reported. So once we took into consideration all of the salaries, and I go back until, I don't just do the 1 year, I'll go back until when the errors began. So there was about $350,000 in contributions that were owed TRS for service and salary not reported, and then reported in error to PERS. So that was community college, state agencies. They were just reporting positions that should have been reported to us that weren't found either when Impera did their audits, or the employers they didn't call and ask if the position should be reportable to teachers or PERS. There were actually quite a few of those that went back several years, and that total for contributions was around $350,000. Again, reported an error to TRS, and these were kind of what Sean was talking about, the bus driver, well, not really the bus drivers, but lunch duty and those kind of things that will now be included in reporting to TRS. So there weren't quite as many of those that I found in the total. So we had to give, $50,000 about for the refunds to the schools, and they would give them back to the employees for reported in error to TRS. The working retirees' salaries not in documents not submitted, those, there didn't seem to be as many of those errors that I found as there were last year. We're still not getting the forms that we need on a regular basis. And all of this, of course, it's included in the reports that I send back and make sure that the clerks know that all retirees, no matter what position they're working in, TRS or PERS, have to fill out those forms and get them to us. So last year, the total contributions that were owed to us that will be collected through the buybacks that active payroll will do, or the adjustments that accounting will do, is right around $760,000 in contributions that were owed to TRS through the past however many years that they're gonna have to pay, and that includes the interest on there also. The biggest error I think I saw was in service credit. So it doesn't have to, it's not money, but the clerks are not reporting hourly people as hourly, they're reporting them as full-time. If they say they work 40 hours a week, they're reporting them as full-time. So, or they're not reporting coaching stipends correctly. And Darla and Janelle and Nolan, and they helped create a new fact sheet out there for the clerks on how to report the service credit for a non-full-time coach or advisor or something like that. And that, I've actually had a few clerks call and have asked me to walk them through, how do I calculate this? I've got a new coach here. So that's really been very helpful. Then one thing that I think is positive is I've had several clerks that I audited last year call me this year and say, okay, so how do I put this one? Is this this is how we're paying them? So they're actually learning the appropriate ways to do their reporting. And as far as lame deer goes, I do have all of their papers I'm doing fiscal year 23, and they're getting me fiscal year 24. So hopefully by the time they start fiscal year 25, they've got it set up correctly, but that's gonna be quite an undertaking. The last appendix there, those are the employees that I did audit last year. I did have one Monforton Elementary is on there. She was not very happy that she had made mistakes. So she requested that I audit her last year's payroll and contributions so that she can go to the board and show that she didn't make any mistakes this past year, because they weren't happy with the findings from fiscal year 23. And this year, I do try to get, my goal is 30 audits a year. So, of course, some of them are gonna take longer, like lame deer. But I do throw in some smaller school districts that would take me a day or two to go through. And then, I follow up with the clerks afterwards, and then I will, the active payroll, they have a folder out there, and it says these ones are done, these ones are, the buybacks are all set up. So it's a much better follow-up than I had last year, I think.
I have a question. This looks like it's a pretty big number. Do you feel like, since you're relatively new, that there's some low-hanging fruit and this is a bigger number than we should expect? Or do you think you'll go out next year and find that much again?
It's probably, it depends on the school. This year I did take into consideration some of Nolan's schools that he knows that there's issues with,
Okay.
and active payroll. So I do get recommendations from the other staff on, you know, this is what we're finding when we do these retirement apps, you know, they're not reporting this, or, so a lot of, those ones I'm trying to do first. So there might be a big number for the next couple years, but I
And
don't
then
think
the
it will
idea
be.
would be that you're also teaching as you go a little bit too,
Yes.
and they
Oh,
try
yeah.
to improve, so, all right,
Yes.
thank you.
And then I have a question, like the hourly employees, so you say they're reporting as full-time, so that means that they're considered 40 hours and they actually get overtime, but that overtime's not being reported. The extra hours, is that what that means?
Well, no, so they're being paid hourly, but they're being reported as full-time employee. So they only, they don't get a 1 FTE every month.
Oh,
They should be
okay.
reporting the hours that they get each month instead of just the 1 FTE for the full year. I think
Okay,
it's 0.11 a month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
okay, that makes sense.
140 hours a month is
Yeah.
full-time, but if they report a 1.0 instead of the actual hours, it overstates their service credit in some circumstances, and probably in a lot of circumstances. And they think they're a full FTE for the school year, and they're not.
Right.
Yeah, so,
I just think this is so important. I mean, to individual teachers, to
Yeah.
individual everybody. I mean, we don't like to be caught off guard. I mean, that happened to me, and then nobody audited it to find it, but you find out you owe this money, and it's hard to come up with.
yeah.
Or the school districts, et cetera. So this, I mean, if you think about this, how much money she has found for us versus her salary, this is amazing to me. It was a very good investment.
Yeah.
There's also liability that goes with
Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, it is, I mean, she's definitely finding, and like she said, she is working through some of what ones we know are problem children. So hopefully, you know, this number will come down in the future, but it's always gonna be pretty good. I mean, it's gonna be way more than her salary. certainly.
Exactly, and if we owe people money, we should pay them, you know?
We do, yeah,
It's,
we do.
all of this is
Yep.
great, so that's exciting.
Good job.
It also depends who you ask. I think this
Yeah.
creates a lot of, I mean, these audits do create a lot of work.
Who wants to be
for
audited?
other staff as
Yeah.
well. Because,
Well, yeah,
Other
'cause
staff
I-
members
like my
set up
school's
all
on
these
there and it explains the change at the district office, like, they hired another person over there, so I'm assuming that came up with the audit. To help out
Yeah.
with payroll, cause
Yeah.
she's retiring, so they're bringing someone in new,
okay,
so. She
Yeah.
may or may not know that, but
Yeah,
do with her conversations.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I didn't know that. And it, I mean, and so to the extent that, you know, Chris can identify these things sooner than later, I mean, it does save everyone money and time and.
How has the collection process gone? Are there districts that get this bill and say,
Well, there's some that
Can't-
definitely
can't
raise an
Yeah.
eyebrow, for sure, but I mean, you know, when you're talking about a lot of these where it's either, you know, salary or service not reported or reported in error, I mean, we set that up as an individual buyback for that person, right? And most of the time, the employer owns both shares because it was an error on the employer's part, and then interest accrues at 7.3%, so they're motivated to pay it as soon as they can, otherwise they have monthly interest post to it.
so this dollar amount we've already received?
well, not
I don't know,
necessarily, yeah,
but that's what all those buybacks are gonna add up to, is that much.
Yeah.
But whether they're even all set up at this point, I couldn't tell you for sure, because some of these were very recent.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
eventually we'll get that much plus probably more, because every month we have interest that posts to those.
And you have a choice, when you have a buyback, they'll say, do you wanna pay it back now? Do you wanna pay it back in 3 years? How long can they set?
3 years, up to 60 months with a service purchase agreement, yeah. 3 months is the minimum, 60 is the maximum, so.
But not
But
for these kind of.
in these, yeah, and these typically are, if they're reporting error or salary service not reporting, it happened after, you know, July 1 of 2016, it's the employer's problem. They paid both shares, so, yeah, both the employee and employer contributions are due.
Good.
Yeah, so, and reported error is between the two respective systems, and we typically, our contribution rate is higher. So if it's reported an error to us, like Chris said, we owe a refund to the school district to then be dispersed to the respective employee. But if it's, if it's reported in error to PERS, then it's, we have to bill them for the difference in contribution rates because our rates are higher, so. Yeah, and they, again, would owe both shares. The employer would owe both shares in that circumstance, so.
Yeah, I just know it's a challenging time for a lot of school districts right now financially.
Yeah.
To get this all the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Right.
And her job will never go away because clerks come and go and,
Yeah.
mistakes happen, so Chris will always have
Plenty to do.
job security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And prior to this, it was just Nolan like saying, this doesn't look right.
Well, it was more the active staff picking it
Yeah.
up through,
Okay.
doing service audits, because they actually are proactive and try to do service audits. We create reports on a monthly basis, based upon how many years of service a member has, and that's how they find them. And also at the time when a person goes to retiring, then sometimes that's 20, 30 years down the road, and you're like, hey, when you first started, they failed to report your coaching, and so that can become very expensive. So this, having Chris actually be proactive in auditing will help school districts in the long run, even though it may be costly right now, just because of the fact she's doing kind of, looking more in totality, a longer period than just, a biennium or something like that, so to speak, but, yeah.
Well, thank you for your report.
Yeah.
Public comment on that?
Good job.
All right, we're on to strategic planning. Sean, do you have that as well?
Yes, so let's see, that's behind tab 8. There really aren't a lot of updates. I mean, as y'all know, we went through sort of the more, it wasn't the full strategic planning this last August, but it was, a review of what we did the prior year, and we've made a few updates to this, but there really isn't a whole lot. I think I'll just touch on probably the ones that are in red font here. Those are kind of the updates. As far as the responsive web design goes, you all saw a prototype of that, where it doesn't matter what kind of device you're looking or you're using, the website will be responsive to that. Darla and Jen have been making great progress on that. In fact, Jen has enough content out there in this design to where we're starting to review the content and we're going to start approving web pages. So, we're making really good progress, and that is definitely something that's in the works, and will be once we have it all done, and we'll obviously roll it out all at once, at least the public website. And there's some other pieces with our member and employer portals that will require a little bit of work to make them responsive as well, but they don't all have to happen at exactly the same time. So we're doing really, really well in that avenue, or this topic, I guess. So the DocuSign ID verification, remember, we want to get to a point where for certain things like online withdrawals, rather than have them print out and go have a physical notary signature and a notary stamp put on their form, that they can do it all electronically. And we intend to use DocuSign for that. This is in the works. We have access to DocuSign, but we haven't had enough time yet to really iron that out. So, this is something that I would suspect possibly by the end of this fiscal year we'll be close to maybe rolling out for withdrawals, or at least we'll have a good plan at that point, but it may not happen until next fiscal year at this point, which will be fiscal year 26. Let's see. The next one was the mass meetings. I did make it to all of those as of Wednesday of this week. I made it to all the rest of them by last May, but I did pick up one. Let's see. Okay, yeah, and then the other one, the survey's been completed for a while now. It's a reminder that we'll have our next survey next calendar year in the fall, most likely. We hired our communications position, and I have been sharing that information about the 457 deferred comp plan that Impera offers with all of the superintendents when I make it out to those meetings. It's a mix. I mean, our survey said that like 45% of our active members didn't think their employers had or offered any supplemental saving. I don't know if that's really the right number or they're just not aware, because it sounds like a lot of them do offer access to a 403B plan, but this 457 plan, for those that aren't offering anything, is really simple for them to set up through Impera, because they're already reporting to Impera anyway for all their PERS employees. And superintendents seem to be pretty, receptive to that idea. I mean, I give them the handout, and on the handout it has Bill Holland's direct phone number, and I haven't checked with him to see if any have actually followed through or not, but they, at least during the meetings, were receptive to the idea. That's kind of the updates. I mean, there's not a whole lot brand new going on. Otherwise, we're just getting ready for legislative session, which will be busy.
Another opportunity for public comment. All right, and then Tammy, applications and benefit adjustments?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, in your packet is the quarterly board report that shows that we process, hold on, let me get to the point where I want to. It has your grand total of 474 recipients through the month of, from May through August 31st, which is our summer months, and that's when we, of course, process the majority of our retirements for the calendar year or fiscal year. In Sean's summary, you can see on page 59, they had an average term pay of $14,876.41, average monthly benefit of $2,580.90, and the average age is just a little under 60, 59.77, with average of 25.05 years of service. In Tier 1, members, of course, can retire at 25 years of service at any age, so it kind of goes along with.
Do we know what percentage of the retirees are Tier 1, Tier 2?
I would say the majority of these are Tier 1. Tier 2 members started became effective in 2013. I mean, of course, 5 years they can retire at age 60, but no, I don't know that off the
If
top
this
of my head.
report doesn't
Tell
kick
us
that
that.
out, Tammy's right, it's probably
Yeah,
at least
90%.
90% are Tier 1.
Yeah,
Right,
no
because
doubt.
that's, yeah, because okay.
Yeah.
Okay, legal counsel's report. Denise is not here, so Sean will do that for us.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the board, I checked with Denise when I talked to her on the phone yesterday, and the legal counsel report is there's really nothing to report. We don't have any pending legal cases that we're aware of at this point in time. There's nothing outstanding, so no news is good news on the legal counsel front.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So this is the time when we're going to close the meeting. Do we have any disabilities today?
We have one.
We have one, okay. So we will close the meeting for a disability application. All right, we need a motion for the disability request of Mr. Haxon.
I move disapproval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Motion passes.
Dan, did you vote?
I did. I said aye.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that is one last item of public comment, but we don't have any public here, so I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well.